about time to get started, so I'll just like to get the introductions underway. First of all, my name is Jane Schellenbarger, and I'm here to introduce Anthony Quinn. I'm on the board. It's my pleasure to introduce Anthony. We are friends from several years back, and so I'm really happy that he can be here to deliver this talk with you today. Anthony Quinn has a broad practice of education, design, writing, and consultancy, working across a range of disciplines and materials. He has a successful design consultancy with clients such as British Airways and Wedgwood. He's acted as project coordinator on Firing Up, the Crafts Council national programs, to reintroduce ceramics into the school curriculum, key skills of ceramics. He holds a post professor of form at the National Academy of Art and Design in Bergen, Norway. He wrote Ceramic Design Course in 2006 and co-author of the Workshop Guide to Ceramics in 2012. Since 2010, he's collaborated with Horizontal Digital Economy Research Institute on the development of a new vision recognition system called Art Codes. The mission of Art Codes is to encourage beautiful interactions and put the human back into the computer-human interaction. Anthony is a council member of Ideal Lab, Norway, that investigates design program, which brings creatives from all disciplines to focus on social issues in an attempt to create tangible works that inspire change. His work for the Crafts Council was primarily to build a national network that encouraged and the transferring of craft skills from practicing artists to teachers and in turn to their pupils. Please welcome Anthony Quinn.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for welcoming me to Portland. Hopefully you can understand me, because I can't change my accent. I've had this accent for 46 years, so there's not much I can do about it. I'll try to speak slowly, but I tend to try and say a lot of things, so the chances of me speaking slowly are fairly slim. So yeah, I would like to talk about a sort of creative ceramic curriculum based in London at Central St Martin's. This is Dora Billington. She started our... Oh, okay, just before I go any further, I'm going to use the word course to describe program, because we call bachelor and MA courses in London or in England course. So when I say course, you probably think program, but it's the same thing. Just need to establish that slight disconnect. So Dora Billington started our course over 100 years ago. My colleague, Rob Kessler, we were doing some research, and he came into the office and he said, "Tony, the course is over 100 years old." To which I replied, "Why did we not know this?" So in January, we rounded it down, so it's 104 years old, so we rounded it down to 100 years, and we did a centenary exhibition. So this is Dora Billington in 1955, and she was a contemporary of Bernard Leach. She was a friend and also a bit of an enemy at the same time, and she said to Bernard Leach, "Craftsmanship alone is not enough. There needs to be more." So this is her talking in a book. It's in a review in 1955. So what I'm hoping to talk about today is the context in which we've been in the UK and in Europe for 10, 15, 20 years of diminishing resources, cuts to education programs. And I was talking, I've got what we call it, a table in the resource booth, in the resource hall. And I've been talking to people over the last few days, and they've expressed concern about some of the things that we're used to in the UK or European context are starting to happen here. Somebody told me that the National Endowment for Arts, I think it's called, or National Arts Endowment, is under threat by the present regime. Well, let's face it, there's a lot of things under threat by the present regime, but the one that relates to you is the National Arts Endowment. We had this some years ago where we switched from free education to paid education, and the complications that happen when you deliver ceramics courses in that context are really tricky. So I'm not like to try and to be some sort of soothsayer and promote doom. What I'm trying to talk about is how we've dealt with this issue and how we've delivered a successful ceramic curriculum over some years faced with these difficulties. This is Michael Gove. He's a very clever guy, but he's decided to be a very much a sort of force for ill winds. And this is him speaking in 2012 when he was the education secretary. He's one of the architects behind Brexit, but he's clever, you know. And he said this. But one of the things at the end is he somehow sees the world can only be understood through the sciences. And he was in the role of education secretary for 4 or 5 years and promoting the idea of a science agenda. You're probably aware of this sort of acronym STEM. I don't know if it's happened over here, but science, technology, engineering, and maths. And this is sort of what he described as the basis for education. So what he was trying to do was promote the idea of an English baccalaureate. They called it the EBAC. And it was to be delivered in schools. And the idea was that it was these core subjects. And the core subjects would exclude the arts. Schools were given the option to exclude arts from their curriculum. This is really divisive. Yeah? It's a really tricky thing to deal with. And at the time, I was the national coordinator for firing up the Crafts Council's program of introducing ceramics into the classroom in high schools. And the sort of problem therein is that you've got a sort of government agenda saying one thing, and you've got the teachers who are like, you know, I'd like to deliver ceramics, I'd like to teach art, but my headmaster or headmistress, the person running the school, is against this. It's not something we value. So it's a really difficult situation that we faced. And in the 3 years that we ran Firing Up, or I ran Firing Up for the Crafts Council, we were the only national coherent program teaching ceramics in schools. And it's a charity. It was running against the education system's agenda. And then these are the sort of polemical figures. So the Crafts Council manifesto in 2015, Our Futures in the Making, contained these facts. So for a 6-year period, GCSE is basically the high school exam. So the high school exam application declined by 25%. I was speaking with the Crafts Council recently, it's gone down even further. And higher education, so degree courses, falling by 46%. These are event horizon figures that cannot be sustained, you know. This is a real problem, that we can't have unsustainable decline in a subject and expect it to survive. This is a guy called Professor John Brooks. He was the Vice Chancellor of Manchester Metropolitan University, and when we were doing a private view for the Firing Up program, he gave this speech. And it's really important to have Vice Chancellors, people in these sort of roles. You know, I don't know if it transfers to here, but Vice Chancellor is the guy who's the head of the university. You know, saying, I don't believe the government's agenda. I believe that arts education provides something really powerful for pupils. It helps them understand the world. Incidentally, when Michael Gove was sort of saying, and we've had other people, Nicky Morgan was the next education minister. She said, there's no room for creativity in education. Really? There's no room for creativity in education? So I tweeted her. I'm not very good at Twitter, but I tweeted her that I was coming around with a van and I was going to pick up the Hogarths and the William Morrises and all these objects that she was, you know, she's in number 10 Downing Street making these proclamations against art while surrounded by world-class art. And she can hold this sort of position that somehow this is not valuable. So I wasn't allowed into Downing Street with my van. It was just as a provocation. And then this is, you won't be able to read this, but this is another thing that is a problem in the context. This is called the National Student Survey. So final year bachelor students are sent a survey by the government. And they're asked questions about like how effective is your teaching and what are the resources in your university. But the findings reflect on the course or program rather than the university. So you're asked how effective the library is, and the student says the library is a bit shit, and then, but actually that reflects badly on the course that they're connected to. So it's a really divisive tool. Luckily, we do really well in it, but it's not to do with the system, it's to do that we run a really good program. and we run a program that allows the students to flourish and develop an understanding of their sort of skill set in a wider context. And that's for a range of reasons. So what I'm going to try and talk about is some of the things we do that allows us to sort of flourish in this context. And the first one of these is that we promote the idea of the students need to suspend their disbelief. They need to trust in the course. They've signed up to be taught by us, and they need to trust that we will teach them well. It's about them recognizing that their education will be useful. So the opposite of suspension of disbelief is motivational reasoning. So I've made this list up. This is a provocation that I do to the students. So I ask them on entry, I say, you need to believe us. You need to suspend your disbelief. You need to trust that your tutors know what they're talking about and that they will give you opportunity and possibility to have a great education. And then I tell them this is the opposite of suspension of disbelief. So, I mean, I've made the list up, but it's purposely provocative. So I'm saying that we're not looking for perfection. We don't want reason, we want wonder. We want speculation rather than acceptance. I was in a staff meeting of there's nearly 90 people in the room, of similar number of people, and I did my 12 angry men moments. I was sat there, and on the way to the meeting, I'd read a report by Jonathan Jones, who's the art critic in The Guardian, which is the main sort of left-leaning newspaper in the UK. And he described it's called, I can't remember, there was the Poppies piece of work that was quite powerful, that was in the Tower of London. Has anyone seen this work? He described it as UKIP art. UKIP are, a really right-wing party. And he basically said that this powerful, highly crafted installation that grew over a period of time, that had thousands of participants, was UKIP art because it only reflected the people killed, the English or the British guys killed in the war. But it's just the scale of operation. They couldn't make everybody killed in the war because you would have needed most of central London to do it. So it was just literally a delivery, that's what they could produce in the time. So when he described this, I read this review on the way to my meeting, and all my colleagues being sort of rude, and I stood up, tipped the table or knocked a glass of water over and said, guys, we have to renounce cynicism. We can't hold this position any longer. We have to be enthusiasts for our subject, and the enthusiasm will rub off on the students. We can't be just, this sort of, this internet 2.0, the idea that I have a voice, but my voice can be always negative. And I was struck last night by the keynote where at the end he was talking about, leaving your cynicism behind and losing envy. And so I think this sort of relates to this in some way. And when I became the leader of the course 18 months ago, the first thing I did was designed this patch. It was based on a bit of fun, or an accidental bit of fun, though. We described the students, there's 3 years, so we described it in the role of a Northern Soul band. So the first years are the enthusiasts, the second years are the opportunists, and then the third years are the specialists. So they were all given these Northern Soul names, and then we devised the sort of Northern Soul patch to follow it. But it's a serious piece of work. It's about creating identity. And I had a strange situation recently where the head of the school, really cool guy, he's an architect who's the head of our school, he came looking for me. He said, Tony, the logo police are after you. I was like, the logo police? Who are the logo police? The marketing departments. The marketing departments were angry with me that I'd created my own identity, well, they called it my own logo. My response is, it's not a logo, it's an identity. It's about creating something that the students can identify with. He said, we're trying to create, the sense of we're like a firm, we're like the Jets and the Sharks in West Side Story. We need the students to identify with the subject and identify with the course. Because from this, that's where the suspension of disbelief comes, and that's where the trust in the education comes. Our sister course is product design, and they dwarf us of a ratio of 3 to 1. So we have about 30 students a year in the program. See, I use program now. Cool. We have about 30 students in the program per year, and they have around 80, 85. So that's a bit of a, this is an uneven battle. So we have to sort of galvanize our students to feel proud about their subject. And giving them a relatively discreet piece of iron-on material that they can stick on their aprons and stick on their clothing to make them feel part of something is a really important part of that. And as is the number, you're the sort of audience that I don't need to tell you what 573 means. You all know that, don't you? Cool. Because that's our code, okay? If the students are being told that if someone asks what 573 means, that's how you know that not one of you. This is your secret code. And part of this sort of suspension of disbelief is also telling the students what journey they're on. There's a really influential book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell, who's a mythologist. And he talks about the hero's journey. And this is me drawing it. We do a lot of workshops that aren't necessarily in ceramics. We do a lot of workshops about methodology and about thinking. And this is me doing a 5-day workshop with the students and explaining what they're experiencing. So the rise here, this is the sort of increasing awareness. This is the blueprint for every film you've seen. Star Wars follows this hero's journey. But this is also about education. This is day one, this is a 5-day course, but this could be a degree. This could be a 3-year program. But what happens on our course, when they're the enthusiasts, they learn so many techniques and processes. Then, when they move into the second phase, the second year of the course, there's a real dip because it becomes harder. Because we take the skill and we take the processes as read. You have them, okay, well done. But now, what are you going to do with them? And this is where it gets really difficult. So this sort of drop is awareness raising. What happens first is they struggle, and then they climb this as they become more able to sort of express themselves through material. They become more confident to succeed. And then they reach sort of a state of nirvana upon graduation where they understand themselves. I had this sort of strange situation recently of some students quoting the 10,000 hours back at me. Students saying, well, it was a really bizarre situation. And they were sort of just at where this is curving into plateau, so the early final year students going, yeah, but I don't have 10,000 hours of education. So we were in a group tutorial, and I did the calculation and said, well, actually, you might not have 10,000 hours, but we've given you 3,800 of them. You should be pretty good, okay? Because 3 years of education, 5 days a week, is 3,800 hours. Okay? So this is not only a sort of, one sort of week, it's also the course of education over 3 years. And then a way of us sort of understanding this is to explore it through frames of practice. So we describe 4 different frames of practice. So we talk about connoisseurship, we talk about the idea of meaningful engagement, also future craft, and then embodied practice. Now, like any sort of system you develop, it's interchangeable. It's not definitive, and many of the things that I'm going to show you following this are pretty much can be sort of move definition. But the purpose of it is to give the students a sort of an understanding of what they're doing. We don't expect people to graduate, and I use another methodology a little bit later. We don't expect students to graduate, and I'm a design by practice person who's interested in connoisseurship. That's not going to translate when you're talking to a gallery. You just talk about your work. But this is about constructing an educative model that the students can clearly sort of take apart and make sense of and understand the track they're on. And it's an intellectual model. So we don't only teach through the material. So I'm just going to show a number of works that sort of frame this. So this is a woman called Samson Van Essen. And she had a prior degree in physics. And these are table sculptures, if you like, that represent physical theories. And she's mixing materials, and she's using slip casting and transfer. But what she's doing is exploring a different concept, and she's using ceramics as the sort of vehicle in which to operate. Whereas this is one of my favorite pieces of work, because people think it's figurative. But actually, these are tools to discuss cyberbullying. So this Japanese student, Kako, she made, and she goes, when she was in high school, she'd been cyberbullied. So then when she came, to do a degree, she had to produce a body of work, and it was an issue that was really important to her. So she made these rabbit figures so that, somebody who was being bullied and teachers could help them help a sort of group explain what someone's experiencing if you're being bullied. And obviously through the ceramic medium, it's hand-built, it's very highly decorative, but it has this much more powerful raison d'etre. It's called Cloud. This is a floating ceramic object. It's basically a rock. She's reproduced a rock and called it Cloud. It's huge scales, big object. And here, she's interested in that whole sort of ceramic quality thing that we all know and love, but trying to sort of express, she was quite a sort of, I don't know if she's religious or, what's the other word? Anyway. But she was sort of, she was trying to express sort of thing, her beliefs around reincarnation, about heaven and all this sort of stuff. So she was, again, embodying something much more nuanced and personal through a very ceramic process. This is a guy called Patrick Morris, and he started his inquiry by asking a very simple question. What happens if we turn the sort of plant pot upside down? Because he'd done a lot of research. He was really interested in working with flowers and stuff, and a lot of flowers and plants grow in this direction in the wild. They don't. The idea that everything grows vertical is because we've taken it into our home. So we tried to produce a situation where a similar thing would happen. And this is won design awards because it's got inside it, it's got a very clever piece of lo-fi science. So it's got a small terracotta reservoir inside. Because when you ask this question, what happens? Well, the first thing that happens if I turn the plant pot upside down is the water drains out of the soil dries, and the plant falls out. So we had to build a collar to hold it in. So that holds the soil in, but how do we keep the water in? So we built I normally draw this when I'm doing a lecture, so he built a sort of small terracotta reservoir that you fill up with water, and the roots of the plant, they're drawn towards the moisture, and then they start to envelop the terracotta reservoir, and they pull the water through the clay. It's almost like capillary action. Very sort of simple process. So it doesn't leach into the soil. It's drawn through by the plant. And it's future craft, so much so that it was in Prometheus, the Ridley Scott film, it was on the spaceship. That's how future craft that is. That's quite cool. And then it's got a number of patents that he's developed around water delivery process and how to keep things in place. But for me, this doesn't use this is not the 3D lab downstairs. This is future craft because of the sort of future-gazing nature of the device, not the actual how he's used clay. If anything, it's really old tech rather than future. Whereas, very much like what's happening here, this sort of nascent 3D printing thing, this is a guy called Ben Matthews, and he's doing computer-aided extrusion, and he's looking at, okay, well, the extrusion does one thing, but we always get this surface. But then he just developed a very low-tech analog approach to it. Was what happens if I sort of do various things to interrupt the flow? So he gets these breaks, and he was defining these in a sort of ceramic canon about hands of the maker, and wabi-sabi, how this sort of ripple on that large object at the back happens. And it's him sort of prodding and playing with the machinery. We worked with a guy called Jonathan Keep, and part of our 100 Years exhibition, we had a 100 Years exhibition to celebrate the course, And in the 100 Years Exhibition, we built a future studio, which is a 3D printing clay lab. So he was, and some students were working continuously, looking at what you can do with this material. And then we had an Olympics where we had a clay Olympics where we had the 3D printing lab and some people throwing, and it was a sort of challenge, and they were challenging each other. But the principle was just to sort of push the craft up, or challenge the notion that this is the future of the craft as well. So I'm not completely sold on the idea that 3D printing or extrusion is the answer. But I do quite like the idea that it has some answers. This is my own personal research. This is looking at interactive surfaces. So all of these motifs can be scanned with a smartphone and an app. So this is working with transfers. And we did a EPSRC, so we applied for government funding. We got quite a lot of money. And we were looking at like how to implement and deliver this drawing possibility into real objects. So here, this is a dining experience in a restaurant. And then if you use your app and you scan the plate, you can learn about the provenance of the plate and where it was made and where the dishes come from. And then if you scan the menu, you get the sort of health information. And then if you, okay, I'm going to stop. And then if you scan the placemat, you would get a GoPro cam in the kitchen, and you would see how your food was being made. Except this was in a Thai restaurant, and in the Thai restaurant we put it on the hob, on the flame, and there were guys that were at the wok for like 30 seconds. So actually the GoPro cam was largely pointing at nothing because the chefs were so quick. So we did this as a sort of live exploration of how you implement the research. And then here this is in London Design Festival. So all of these images work like a QR code, but they're a set of drawing rules. So this is, again, something we work with the students. So we have a big print area. So we're introducing to the students this idea of the Internet of Things and how they enable objects to have this sort of virtual life. But then future craft can be provocative as well. So this is a student called Ginny. And we used to do a £1 gift project. So just in the week before Christmas, we would collaborate between courses. And then we would have a gift-giving ceremony where the students would make a gift for the students from other courses. And she spent, the budget was £1, which was the key thing. So she spent some time working out how to drill a hole in a pound coin to make a ring. And then at the presentation, my colleague at the time, Catherine, she said, "But that's really illegal." I said, "Yeah, it's a good idea though, isn't it?" And then she went to a gig afterwards and sold them for £10 each. Okay, this is arguably the most profitable product on the planet. It's got 900% profit. There isn't any product made on the planet that has that much profit. But from the same project, this arrived. This is in 2007. You have these in the US? You call them, in England, we call them a piggy bank. So she made a piggy bank out of the Financial Times. In 2007, the Financial Times is saying, invest, 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 buy shares, buy shares, buy shares. No prizes for what happened in 2008. Anyone remember? So this predicts the fall. This predicts the worldwide economic fall, because she takes the Financial Times, which at the time cost £1, and made a piggy bank, saying, no, save. Trust me, guys, you have to save. If I'm honest, she didn't say that. I've reverse engineered all that into this. That's how I've described it, but I still see it as this powerful object. You know? And then we have this idea of connoisseurship. So this will be something that you guys will all be used to. It's the idea of working at the height of your material capabilities and producing beautiful objects. It doesn't mean that they're any less powerful in terms of what they discuss, but their primary rationale or reason is about quality. So here, this guy David, you can't really see in this picture, but these are a set of cuckoo clocks. He was Swiss Portuguese, So we decided to work with the stereotype of Switzerland, make a cuckoo clock, but then he made them in a Portuguese factory. So we encourage the idea, one of the things that we really encourage our students to do is get out of the course and sort of leverage what they know into different opportunities. So him working in Vista Alegre, which is one of the big Portuguese manufacturers, to make his work to a really high quality. This is Ellie's work. She's really interested in the idea of this is performance of in restaurants when they serve you food. So it was about the performance of being served. So she made these very elegant, almost impossible objects to be used in that context. You don't get this sort of object used in a catering context. And Emma's work, she made this collection of, I think it was like 60 different cups. It was very much like the exhibition you got here where there's all these cups, but her thing was about like getting people to understand and trying to understand how they make value judgments in objects. So there's a whole suite of cups that were made by different processes using different qualities. And her purpose was really to just get you to examine why you were making a choice of whether something which you thought was beautiful and which you didn't. So they range from here with the highly crafted through to mugs, which would have like a sort of, platinum rim painting. And it was very much about sort of challenging our own value judgments. One of the big things that's happened in the course in the last 10 years is this idea of meaningful engagements. This is about getting out of the department and working with people. And I don't know if you recall on the badge at the start, it said opportunism. When I designed that, some of my colleagues said, but opportunism is pejorative, it's a negative. Now that's what people have decided. Opportunism is what we should be teaching the students. We should be teaching the students to take their skills, take their material knowledge, and go and do things, and go and try and get things done. So this is, I got the students a gig in the British Museum. So I came home to them, I came to the studio and I said, guys, okay, in 1 month's time, you have a weekend where you have to deliver a workshop in the British Museum, in the huge central court. And he said, yeah, but what's the workshop? I don't know. I've got you the gig, you have to deliver the workshop. So they basically came up with this idea of reimagining the museum. And they got this huge floor plan printed. And then they were just encouraging people to make and express their idea of what the museum stood for in this context. What was interesting, we got a lot of people making dinosaurs. We said, you're in the wrong museum. The Natural History Museum is 3 miles away. So we ended up like tourist information as well. And this is Jolanta. Jolanta's a really interesting student. She was in the Solidarity movement in Warsaw in the early 80s. Then she came to live in London. Solidarity movement was the movement that effectively brought down communism in Poland. And then she came to work with us, and she studied for 3 years. And in her final year, she made this. And this is a dinner for the world, for the world. And basically, it's a set of plates that have been highly manufactured to be believable. One of the things about making these objects, if you're going to make a table service that's about a dinner for the world, the tableware needs to be believable before you can make the sculpture. So she really killed herself to make the tableware. And then basically the proportion of plates relates to GDP. So the largest plate was Norway, because it's got, per GDP, was the richest country at the time. I can't remember what the smallest place is, and you can see she also made the glassware as well. So it's an interesting thing that she was in Warsaw, in solidarity movements, obviously felt very powerfully about that. And then it comes back into her work 7, 8 years later, where she's making this effectively sculpture. This is one of my favorite pieces of work that's come out of the course in many years. This is basically an infographic. I don't know how visible it is from far away, but those dots, they're small black basalt pots. And each one of those pots was made to represent the female form, the mother. And I called it an infographic because this map is the daily rate of maternal mortality at birth per UNESCO figures. So basically each one of these pots represents a woman who dies giving birth. And this is a photograph from the opening of the grad show, but there is no Northern Hemisphere. Well, there is no sort of Northern Europe or North America. Because it happens, but we don't have a daily rate. Whereas in India, there's 140 deaths a day. So it's really powerful. And when we showed at the show, it was about 6 meters long by 3 meters tall. People would come in and do that, that cynical thing I just denounced, that I got you all to denounce a few minutes ago. They go, oh yeah, but where's Scandinavia? Where's Holland? And they go, read the fucking sign. Then they'd read the sign and walk away, sort of, yeah, okay, thanks. Because it's a powerful thing, But actually it was easy to sort of dismiss at first by it looked unfinished or it looked broken somehow. And it's only when you access the information do you understand what it's about. That's why I described it as an infographic. This is a recent graduate, Charlotte. So on the right, this is her grad show. She produced a march across the table of the 96 mammals on the World Wildlife Fund's red list, the endangered species. Then last year she did Ceramic Art London. She went into hibernation for about 18 months, developed a new body of work. So this is her work now, these pots with these. So she's basically a figurative maker. But it's directly linked to this work, not just to do with the sort of figure, but as a new emerging maker in a studio where she's got to pay rent and everything else, 15% of her profits go to the World Wildlife Fund, to this, for the endangered species. So it's really cool because, like, okay, I'm an emerging maker, I've got to pay all these bills, but I really strongly believe in this, so I still have to deliver on it. This is Maham's work. She works for restaurants, and she acts as a sort of a consultant to restaurants that would like to produce sort of authentic handcrafted work. But what they have a tendency to do is not want to pay the going rate. They always want to go and work in a community, but not pay the community the right funds. But she's quite clever. She gets the job from the restaurant, then she goes to the community and says, okay, this is the deal, this is what they're going to try and do to you. So I'm going to help you talk about your skill in a way that they have to pay the correct rate. So she's a sort of consultant, go-between, fifth columnist type person. So this is her working in Sri Lanka to produce this work, which was for Jamie Oliver. I don't know if you know who Jamie Oliver is. He's a very famous chef in Europe. So yeah, this is us talking about research to design collaboration. So we try and do a lot of work that is forwarding the sort of subject. And one of the things that we encourage the students to do is this opportunity finding. So here we worked with a guy called Marek Kula. He used to be based in the US. He's now back in Poland. He taught at Pratt, yeah. And he is now based in this factory. He's built a studio on a factory in Chmielów in Poland. And so we did this cultural exchange where there was students from the US, students from England, and students from Poland. And they did this art-food collaboration where the idea was to make work that explored the idea of working with chefs and producing sort of high-quality works that look at the expression of dining and expression of food. And then 4 students from each college were selected to go and work in the factory in Poland. And then we put on exhibitions all over the world. So there's one in New York, one in London Design Festival, which is what this image is, and one in Gdansk in Poland. But the purpose, I suppose the point of moving into this idea of research to design collaboration is we value the idea of engaging with other people, because that's what the students are going to have to do when they leave. So it's not about looking inward to the subject and only looking inward to the subject. They also have to look out into who can I work with. And I know from this project there's students now moving between London and Gdansk and London and New York because they've made relationships during this project when they spent a month working in a factory. Because if you spend a month working in a factory where you can't speak the language, you get very good at expressing yourself in different ways, you know? So it's a really sort of visceral experience. And this just happened last week. This is our first year students. So year 1 students, they've been on the course since October. So 4 months in, they've done an exhibition in the Royal Horticultural Society, which is it's the sort of definitive body about sort of horticulture in England, and they're behind the Chelsea Flower Show and all these things. And I mean, this idea of opportunism, which is really important, is, okay, we get this opportunity, but we don't give it to the final year students because it's not about how these people reflect back on the course, which is often what happens. You always give the opportunity that's the most public to your most able students. That's just building the same old paradigm. Is we want the students to have the experience. Imagine what it's like for the students having a public exhibition in this place in year 1 and how it affects how they operate in year 3, or how they go on to do an MA or MFA or move forward. So it's really important for us to trust the students to be able to deliver. And they deliver because we trust them. So they're this, you know, I asked the students to suspend this disbelief, and we as the staff team generating the opportunities have to suspend our disbelief back in the opposite direction and go, you know what, they'll be able to do it. And coming out of that, I don't know what it's like. Well, you have a similar thing in education in the US. You have to write various positioning papers for your university and help them understand how the course is structured. And we call it revalidation. So it's a 6-year cycle in the UK. And we had to do it recently. And in this documentation, we wrote down that we saw ourselves as subject custodians, because there's only 2 bachelor programs that are called ceramics in the UK. There's a number of bachelor programs that are mixed materials, so you get wood, ceramics, metal, whatever. So and what's happened is universities, usually universities rather than art schools, so where the art department is part of a university that they've got an English department, a science department, what tends to happen is eventually these courses get shoved together because they're expensive to run, they take up a lot of space. So in our documentation that we had to rewrite, and it has to go to a panel, you know, to be okayed that we can continue to run the course, we said, okay, we take our role very seriously. We're one of the few courses that is called ceramics left. So we stand up and we take the role of subject custodian. And part of that is we go and visit factories. So in the first week of the second year of the program, we go on a field trip for 4 days and we visit factories in Stoke-on-Trent, so all the traditional pottery factories. And we expose the students to different things. This is one of our students, Emma. This is in front of a picture pile at a tile factory, Johnson Tiles, huge volume tile manufacturer. But actually this picture pile is to be recycled. So they take all of this waste material and they offer a service to other companies. They take the waste material from other ceramic manufacturers and they recycle it and make grog and put it in their tiles. So what's interesting is we don't really talk about this because the students see it and they go, shit, look at that. What is that? And then eventually it's actually good what they're doing because they're recycling everyone else's waste. And we see a lot of handcraft, a lot of the skills that we use in the studio, but we see them done in a context where it's a factory process, but each person using their hands at any one stage, that process is a craftsperson in their own right. So we try and get the students to, when we go around the factories, the students are like, chatting to people how they do stuff, and usually the woman or the man operating that point in time will go, no, sit down, I'll show you. So we're in the factories for hours where the students are having a go. But they're learning the processes that they use in the studio, but they're learning the context of where they were developed. And then we visit clay manufacturers, and this is, we've made a relationship with this is in a company called NCECA Ceramics in Stoke-on-Trent. And they make this really interesting clay body. It's it's a fine stoneware, but it's once fired. The guy there on the left, this is Dr. Rob. And the position, he's the sort of head scientist for the company. And they've done a lot of work on working out how to develop a clay body that reduces fuel wastage. So they can vitrify their clay at 1120. This is important because over 33% of fuel waste happens at the high temperature. So the higher the temperature go, the more fuel we use. So by reducing the temperature, 100, 120 degrees, they're having a radical impact on how much fuel we use to firework. And they now sponsor our course, and they give us this wonder material free. And we take the students to their factory, because then what we're trying to do is educate future makers that once firing, raw glazing, as we call it in our context, is a really important way to go. And here's some of the students having a go. Here they're doing jollying. And also, we're also very proud of being an inner city university. So we're in the centre of London at King's Cross. So this is us doing raku firing, but we do shop and trolley kilns. So these were found in the canal. There's a canal outside of the college. So we found the shop and trolleys that were stolen by people, and it's usually thrown in the canal. And then we take them out and dry them off, and then we build our raku kilns in sort of the detritus of urban living, rather than the sort of, the usual, powerfully beautiful raku kiln that we're all used to, especially in the US, where you have lots of space, so people build these amazing kilns in the woods and stuff. We're next to the Eurostar terminal in the centre of London, so we do raku with shop and trolleys. And then one of the key things for us is about engaging in industrial partnerships. And we do a lot of outward-facing stuff, because we're trying to train the students in their activity that they will graduate with. So it's not, I like the idea of self-expression and sculpture and art, but we like to give them really real experience as well. And so last year we did this competition with Nachtmann, which is a German glassware manufacturer. And we designed glassware for volume production. And it's basically, it's a monoblock, so it's a molding process. It's the same as slip casting. It's an identical process, except it's glass. So it was a very easy sell. This company was a bit skeptical, but your ceramics was like, no, it's okay. We understand molding. We understand manufacturing. We can do this. Then we did a competition across the course, and these were two of the winners, Eva and Valerie. And the students had to do a very formal presentation. And then the student's anchor, who's a German student who won the overall prize. She did a really cool thing. She sort of channeled the sort of Central St. Martin's mythology, if you like. Central St. Martin's is the place where the Sex Pistols played their first ever gig. And she was German, and the competition is called Next Gen. So she sort of developed this concept about critiquing Next Gen, that Next Gen, although it's different from everything else Nachtmann product, it always looks the same, because it's a sort of annual competition. So she came up with a punk concept, and the first thing was to hash up all of the prior next-gen products and create this sort of collage. But what she was trying to do was encourage the client that this sort of attitude was how the company needed to reframe themselves. She was saying that you've done your next-gen competition for 10 years, and already you are looking conservative. It's not as radical as you think it is. It's very powerful for the student to critique the client and throw it back at them, going, guys, you're not as cool as you think you are. So following this lead and following this sort of Central St. Martin's sort of punk thing, we held a judging in our workshop, and the judges had to wear overalls like the students did. So, but then all three works were launched in Frankfurt 2 months ago. So we have 3 students on the course who are going to receive royalties from a client. Now, there'll be a number of people they're not in the audience who are not into production, and that's not the point of what I'm talking about. The point of what I'm talking about is the experience for the students and the learning they gain from doing that. I would expect half the students we make take these opportunities. Only half of them will follow on with these opportunities in later life, but they will have experienced them. And I often say to the students that they don't have the critical faculty. I say to the students, is anyone on call? They go, no. Does anyone have children they have to pick up from school or kindergarten? No. Okay, you do not have the opportunity to say no to me. Because the contract was you suspended your disbelief at the start of the course, and we are putting as many opportunities in front of you so that you learn, you sort of optimize your learning. Whether you follow these opportunities afterwards, or you might renounce the idea of working for a German glass manufacturer, that's okay. I don't mind that. But the idea is that you've experienced it. So these are some clients. We go to a trade fair in Frankfurt, and we always get the design managers of various clients to present their work. So we're also looking in the sort of commercial context. But then also we like to reframe the idea of what a client actually is. So here, this is our industry engagement project this year was with 5 charities. So we did work in the charitable sector. And we were looking at, local garden, Reclaim the Menopause, Studio 3 Arts as an arts organization, Global Generation, Wellcome Trust for Dementia. So the students made very powerful, very poignant works, but they still saw it as a sort of client relationship. So here's us doing various engagement activities. I'm going to go a little fast now because I'm realizing I'm running out of time. So this is what I hacked an educational piece of work from someone else, a guy called Biggs, and he developed a solo taxonomy, and this is me addressing his piece of work but trying to turn it into a sort of a making context. But what we're hoping is that by the end of the students' experience on the course, they're in this sort of extended abstract phase, where we're expecting the students that they can conceptualize, invent process, impose will, challenge orthodoxy. This is what's come from this sort of really intensive program, that the students at the end of it are able to challenge the orthodoxy of the subject. And we espouse the idea of troublesome knowledge. Meyer and Land talk about in their communities of practice work 10, 15 years ago. They talk about the idea of legitimate peripheral participation. If we're a community of practice, which we all are here in NCECA, then legitimate peripheral participation is key. Basically means it's okay not to know, because I'm responsible for teaching you. So you're allowed to be on the edge of the subject because you'll be taught. And we do a lot of learning in transformative context. This is our pub quiz. So every year when we go on our field trip, on one of the nights we have a pub quiz, and it's basically a learning tool. And yes, the most important part of being in a pub quiz is alcohol, so it makes it a little bit more fun. But the students we use the pub quiz as a way of making sure that they're concentrating when they go on the field visits, and they go and see manufacturers and stuff, and then they see then we ask questions about. Well, the first question is always, what was the name of the service station we stopped at on the motorway on the way to the first factory? So we also. But we're trying to basically make the students engage in different ways. This is us having a discussion with a manufacturer, Emma Bridgewater, and this is Barney and Ian, who are the organisers of the British Ceramics Biennial. So in a factory, we had a mini symposium where we discussed opportunities. And we hope that our students become confident and critically aware designers. We work with a guy called Stephen Brookfield, and he does this idea of a critical instant questionnaire. And we basically survey the students continuously, always asking the same questions, so we don't have fear of the question. It means that when I ask them what was the most distancing moment, they're able to express themselves because they've had this question happen to them continuously before. It's very similar to the earlier work. We refer to design by practice, design by project, and design by concept. But they're interchangeable. And we do a lot of workshop-based teaching, and often we work through clay, but often we don't allow them to work through clay because it becomes very much a sort of comfort tool. So here is talking about what they've learned recently. And then I do a workshop called Blow Up, where I get the students to work 5 days through a design methodology, and I get them to work on each other's work, and we swap each other's work, and this is the sort of diagram of the process we're going through. And this, the first thing we do is get them to draw portraits of each other, and you asked, what are you going to be? So somebody said, I'm going to be a child. So they're expressing how they're going to operate in that time. This piece of work, this is basically a land grab. I claimed everyone else's practice to be a sort of expression of what the course was about. Activist, architect, auteur, artisan. and then basically it's a matrix. So encouraging the students to look at these people's work if you worked in this way. And then we still come back to working through the material. Maria's an architect, and this is actually large-scale work. It's a proposal for building cladding, but it's basically extrusion and casting clay and allowing it to sort of just create these free forms. This is Kensuke. He was from the area in Japan that had the tsunami. It happened to be in London when it happened. But he was very powerfully upset by the idea that the Japanese governments were commissioning more nuclear power stations. So the private view, the grad show opening, he did a performance where he made cherry blossom leaves out of porcelain. And this was for him, he called it Japanese Stoicism, is that this was his quiet act of rebellion to make these objects. This is another performance piece. I'm going to just go a little faster. And then this is a really powerful piece of work. Sarah, she, in her final project last year, her final, we call it private view, her grad show opening was on the 22nd of July. That's the day that we had the Brexit vote. So her piece of work was called Library, and it was about when you were ostracized in ancient Greece, it was an election, and you would basically write on a potsherd whether you wanted someone to be ostracized or whether you wanted them to be kept. So she reproduced this process, and it first happened around Brexit. So it's a very politically charged piece of work. It was exhibited again in November. I don't need to tell you what happened in November, you all know. Yeah, and this is the work. So we see ostracized Trump. Okay, cool, look below with more powerful statements. More women in power. So it's a piece of work that reflects the sort of zeitgeist. Okay, I've got about 2 minutes, so I'm just going to zap through. So, okay, where does that leave us? What's the future? So this is my sort of positioning statement. I won't really go into detail, but we need to develop a really active research community, building on opportunity, building on PhD, KTP, knowledge transfer partnerships, conference papers, etc. We also need to have a process of embodied pedagogy, which basically means that we can't just be intuitive educators. We also need to understand pedagogy, pedagogy being the science of teaching. So staff need to be trained and do all of these sort of things. We need international developments, so we need to be out. Part of the reason I'm here with you is for international developments, building a sort of network and trying to get to know people in different countries. Doing a lot of work with Jing Dejen at the moment. Key to this is we have to make future makers. We can't trust the government to educate people in our subject. So we have to go and do it in schools. We're doing a project for the Crafts Council called Make Your Future, which is working with schools and looking at technology and ceramics. But it's our role. We have to do this because we can't trust the government or the state to deliver this sort of education anymore. Opportunity creation, I've already spoke a lot about that, but it also drives income and it drives possibility for students. And then to build a sort of international center for ceramic design that encapsulates all these things and is welcoming to our partners from different countries. So, leave you with the words of Dora Billington. So we can't be, all right, you can read it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you want to ask a question, can you come to the microphone because they're recording, yeah?
Thank you. Do programs such as this invite or welcome non-traditionally aged students?
Yeah, our oldest student was 67. And he was a former chartered surveyor, so like an architect. And somebody graduated at 65 and is now exhibiting in the north of England a lot. So yeah, we encourage mature students.
Thank you.